If you're a dungeon master and your lore is scattered across 15 Google Docs, a half-dead notebook, and that one random post-it that's stuck to your monitor that you never look at, well, this one's for you today. Now, before I get into anything, I want to just give a huge shout out to today's sponsor, Worldbuilding, but we will talk about them in just a bit. Now, stop me if this sounds familiar. You build this massive world, you have these gods and these empires and all these secret factions, and you've spent all of this time thinking about these intertwined histories, and your lore is just incredible, and you're proud of it, and then you get to game night and a player goes, wait, what was that NPC's name again? And you just freeze, because you definitely wrote it down somewhere. You're just not sure if it was in that folder that was labeled World Notes 2, or maybe it was in the one that's labeled Important Stuff Final with like all caps, or if it's just on that napkin that you used at Starbucks. And I've been there. I've been there way too many times. And this video is not a tutorial. It's not a 5 steps for perfect world building. It's not become a lore god in 24 hours. This is just what has helped me survive. These are 5 rules that I started following for my own games, for my own DMing, my world building, that I've started following over the last couple years that have taken me from this like little lore hoarding disaster to a DM that's actually excited to prep again, and I think that's the big thing. So here's what I do when I start drowning in lore. So first up, my first rule is to prep for the session, not the campaign. I used to sit down and try to write some Tolkien level 10-layer plot for every single campaign. I thought that if I didn't know the name of the goddess who forged the moon hammer that killed the first lich, that somehow I wasn't ready, whatever that means. And every session I'd show up with like 6 pages of this epic lore and these scripted lines, only for the players to spend all this time trying to get into a locked bakery instead of caring about all that lore that I had created. And honestly, a lot of that is because I was used to adventure modules. That's how I learned, and it's what I knew, so I built my campaigns like an adventure module with lots of notes for all the possible directions that the story might go. But I realized over the years that most of the time I would barely make a dent in my notes from session to session. 3 sessions would pass and we'd barely moved 5 or 10% into my notes. And even sooner after than that, I realized that I could just abandon my notes altogether or just write a few bullets, and that helped me just as much, if not more, as when I was hyper-focused. So now I just prep for what's immediately in front of them. If they're heading into a town, I prep the town, not the country, not the king, not the continent. If they're fighting a sewer mimic, I prep the mimic, not the miles of sewer that they'll be possibly traversing through all of these tunnels. Now, don't get me wrong, I'll make a note or two about where the sewers might lead. What would be a cool dead end of the sewer, or a secondary encounter that they can find if they continue down here, but I don't spend hours on that. I still have ideas for that long-term stuff, and like I say in all my videos, I have a direction. I know where I want the story to go, and I give my players these gentle nudges, and if they take the bait, then great, and if they don't, well, then I go back and I change my notes to reflect that new direction that they have now put on me. But I don't build them until the players move towards those directions. And you're not a bad DM for not having everything mapped out in advance, and you're not a bad DM if you do. But if you're drowning in burnout, just prep the session, not the saga. You'll thank me later. Now, tip number 2 is to use a system of notes. Now, this next tip fixed a huge chunk of the mental clutter that was killing my prep time and was leading to a lot of my burnout. And as world builders, it takes an extensive amount of notes to keep track of everything. I honestly don't think it matters what level of storyteller you are. All world building requires notes of some kind, and the deeper down the rabbit hole you go, the more extensive your notes become. I mean, like I said, I had 15 Google Docs, and yeah, I definitely only had 15 Google Docs. I had a Google Doc for factions, I had one for regions, I had one for gods, I had 3 for plot ideas and short stories, and I'm not kidding, I actually did. And that's when I realized that the real problem wasn't that I didn't have my notes, it's that they weren't connected. At least for me, I'm a visual person and it's how my brain works. I need to see it. I need to see it! My issue is that I couldn't see how one piece of lore connected to another. I couldn't remember which NPC belonged to which faction or what the hell I named the tavern 2 towns back because it was lost in a sea of Google Docs and folders. And I'm gonna be honest, my brain is not made for remembering that kind of stuff. If you know, you know. And I would sit there at the table wishing I could go to this sort of mental map of the world in my head and just double click into the city and pull up a list of the people in the city and find the NPC right there. And there are a lot of ways that you could achieve this. So for example, I used to use Milanote, which allowed me to create sort of like mood boards. And that was fine, except I got into the eventual same sort of rabbit hole in that I was creating way too many folders, way too many pictures, too much text and not enough navigability, if that's a word. So lately what I've been using is World Anvil, and it's completely changed everything for me as far as how I keep track of my world. World Anvil is the world building and campaign management tool that's been trusted by not just dungeon masters, but also writers and pretty much anybody that needs to do any sort of world building. And that's because World Anvil isn't just a fancy note-taking tool. It's kind of like an all-in-one campaign manager. It's a lore bible and a world building assistant. It lets you link characters and maps and timelines and locations all to each other, so you can actually find the plot threads that you've forgotten about by just clicking on the thing and sorting through the information that you put in. And it doesn't have to be specific to Dungeons and Dragons. It doesn't matter if you're writing a TTRPG setting for a fantasy epic or a sci-fi world in space. You can go as big or as small as you want. The great thing about it is that World Anvil just sort of helps you organize your chaos without killing your creativity or slowing you down, which I know, at least for me, I hate getting distracted when I'm in a creative mood. I mean, you can have all of the information right there. You can have your lore, your quests, NPCs, you can have all of it just accessible to you. And if you need it, and you really want to go that crazy, you can build entire family trees like you can see right here. And you can also create annotated maps for your world and for your towns and for your galaxies. And for you DMs out there, you can even control what your players see, so they get all the juicy hints and you get to keep all of those secrets. This tool has changed the way that I run my games, how I organize my world, and more than that, it really just helps me present my world like a pro. So if you want to try it for 51% off, yes, 51%, that's more than half off. Use my code FANTASYFORGE for 51% off of any of the yearly memberships. So what's cool about World Anvil is that if a player asks me who runs this town again, I don't have to dig, it's right there. I just click the town, click the ruler, bam, done. And what's even better is that it made my bad habits obvious to me. Like, I'd write lore for a region that had no NPCs in it, or I'd make a cool cult but then forget to tie it to any events. So I'm able to just sort of see what is connected and what's not, and where I'm missing information and what has too much information, where I've put too much love, where I haven't put enough. And World Anvil just made that all visible, and once it was visible, I could fix it. Now, you don't have to use World Anvil, you don't have to use this system, but use a system that connects the dots for you, and a folder full of docs is still chaos if it doesn't talk to itself. If all you have is a bunch of Google Docs with no actual organization, that is not a system. Now, tip 3 is to make your lore do something. If I had a gold coin for every backstory, kingdom, or secret order that just sat there doing nothing, I'd be able to retire from DMing and open a tavern. So this rule I keep for myself is, if I'm writing some lore, I need to be putting it in play instead of just hoarding it. Now, obviously, that doesn't mean I'm never going to write about anything else ever again unless it's happening in the story. And don't get me wrong, I love world building and I'm doing it on my drive to work. I get it. But what it is about is mentally removing yourself from the idea of having to have everything prepped. You don't have to feel like I have to know everything and my players will hate me, because all that kind of mentality does is create chaos both in your folder structure and in your head, and we want everyone mentally strong over here, okay? So ultimately what I do is, if my players don't encounter it, if they don't ask me about it, or it doesn't affect them, then it's not really part of my world, right? It's just this sort of emotional support lore that I've put off to the side. So what I think about now, how I think, sort of my mindset now as a dungeon master, is that I like to think about lore as a resource, not like a trophy. So I ask myself, is this something my players can actually run into soon? And if the answer here is no, then I don't even need to worry about it right now. I'll write down a couple of sentences and something that I can use as inspiration later, and then I just put it off to the side. So I might literally just write down a party of 3 that gives off Power Rangers vibes. I don't know why that's what I thought of. But otherwise, I can just sort of remove that from my mental checklist, right? Clearing sort of the things of what needs to get done now versus later. Then I'll ask myself, how can I hint at this through an NPC or tie it into a player's backstory without them realizing? And then I will ask myself, how does this challenge my players? And if I can do those things, if it's something they can do soon, if it's something that I can tie into the story somehow, and if it's something that's going to actually challenge my players, well, when you have the answer to those 3 questions, you're just doing the reps for what you really need to, as opposed to fatiguing yourself, which honestly just gives you more time to do what you want to do and have more fun. And not only does this clean up your notes, it actually cleans up your headspace too. Less junk, more playable content, which is the main goal here, because you are, after all, playing a game of pretend with a bunch of nerds around a table pretending that you're not doing that. So tip 4 is to use fewer tools, but actually use them, you know? So maybe you've got Google Docs, you have Notion, OneNote, Milanote, World Anvil, physical notebooks, Discord messages, random Pinterest boards, all of that stuff. Well, here's the tough news. You're not organizing by having all of those, again, you're just hoarding. So I say this with love because I was doing it too. I kept trying new systems thinking this one would be the one that finally clicks, but all I was doing was sort of spreading that chaos thinner. So now I have a rule. I use fewer tools, but I use them more often. So what's the one tool that you'll actually open while your players are asking you, wait, who's this guy again? If that's Google Docs, fine. I picked one system for me that could handle the bulk of what I needed. For me, World Anvil ended up being that system because it lets me build and connect all of my lore in a way that doesn't turn into a maze for me and the way that I organize. And more importantly, I actually open it. But for you, that might literally just be a system of folders. And if that's what works for you, then that's awesome. So just ask yourself, what do I actually open when I prep? Use that, ditch the rest. You can always come back later if you miss something, but your tools are making you overwhelmed. They're slowing you down. And that's part of the problem. And then tip 5 is to take notes like your future self depends on it, because honestly they do, and honestly you're letting them down. This tip is the one that saved me more than any tool ever could. Have you ever opened an old note and you see something like remind them of the merchant, and you're like, cool, but which merchant? Why? What am I reminding them of? This I like to call past me sabotage. So now I write like I'm prepping for someone who's never seen this world before, because future me is tired, distracted, and probably running the session after work while the player is texting me, I'm bringing a friend, is that cool? So when I write my plot notes, my NPCs or my lore, I try to make them immediately usable. So instead of NPC Cassandra, I will write some additional things like Cassandra, the sharp-tongued apothecary who knows the mayor's secret. So instead of dungeon, 3 rooms, I say 3 rooms. 1 is a corpse pile with a clue, 2 is the fake shrine that's a mimic, and 3 is the locked door that's hiding the cult behind it. So now, even if I have to make things up on the fly, I have something that has at least prepped future me a little bit. And this kind of writing notes like this removes that friction from your mental load. You don't have to decode your own cryptic ass notes, and that saves you so much brain energy in the long run. And the best part about it is that it encourages you to write things down. Now, I will wake up in the middle of the night and jot down notes so that I don't forget, because it's just the way that my brain works. I will forget things. And so if that's you, if you're also like that, I highly encourage you to also keep a dream journal. Doing both of those things is a way to kind of train yourself to think creatively and encourage that daydreaming and muse searching that you need for good ideas. Is that technically an extra tip? But writing your notes down effectively is part of that too. So stop screwing future you over past you. Prep like future you is a complete stranger. It'll change your life. So that's it. 5 rules that helped me finally get my lore under control and actually made me excited to prep again. Remember, you don't need to be perfect. You just need to stop drowning. Learn to swim. Pick one of these, try it, see how it feels. Let me know in the comments what you think. And if World Anvil sounds like it could help you, you can use my code FANTASY4. It gets you 51% off the annual membership. The link's down in the description. All right, that's it for me. Now let me know in the comments, what's the weirdest note that you have in your notes right now? I need a laugh. It's been a week. Leave it down below. And now it's time for some quick shoutouts. Gray Seer Squeak says, Tobias at 140. Great catch, and also just a great name. Makes me smile just saying it. Valen13 says, so adorable. So are you, Valen. Zoe Kemp 2134 says, hey, I dread the idea of being a full-time DM as I never ever had the chance to really be a player, but I do love world building, so I am torn. Well, something that I keep going back to whenever I wish that I could be a player in some of my games, I just take all of those players that I wish I could, or all of those characters that I wish I could create, and I just remember I can just put them in as NPCs, so in a way, you get to play all your characters, and all of your players at the table only get to play one. So if you try to see it more like that, it gives you a lot more choices and a lot more flexibility in what you get to do as a player, because at the end of the day, you are still a player. You just have a little more responsibility than everybody else, but you are still getting to play. I hope that helps. Otherwise, you could just ask your players to, do a one-shot every once in a while so that you get to take a seat in the player's chair and not have to worry about all of the DMing and stuff. So now, if you were paying attention in today's video, leave a timestamp in the comments down below with where you saw Tobias, and you just might get shouted out in the last... Damn it, I was so close. You just might get shouted out in the next video. As always, forge on, my friends, and remember, look out for mimics.